falling apart, but it is not falling apart. It is just going through a giant transition of human consciousness into hopefully something better, more spacious, more open, and more beautiful. Today's topic is self-authorship and authenticity. So how can we bring in this new era of human consciousness? Self-authorship. We write it ourselves and we do it authentically. So we're going to talk a little bit about that today and how that all goes down. So Morgan, welcome. Thank you for joining me.
Hey, Brian.
How are you today?
I'm doing good. Happy to see you.
Yeah, happy to see you as well. So self-authorship, that's a big concept.
Yeah. Yeah. So I think when we say self-authorship, all that really means is you're asking yourself, who do I want to be? And then intentionally moving towards that. So that kind of requires, some mindfulness and self-awareness to think about who do I want to be? What values do I want to have? What beliefs do I want to have? Because there's a lot of values and beliefs that we get from culture, from our socialization, that are things that we kind of adopt and internalize that aren't always intentional. And so self-authorship is looking at those values and beliefs, looking at the way that we live our lives, and then saying, is this actually what I want for myself? Who do I actually want to be? And how much is it in my power to move towards that or create that for myself?
Yeah, exactly. It's funny because this comes up in so many, it's like pervasive, like self-authorship. We are authoring our life, whether we like it or not, whether we know it or not. It's just a matter of whether we're doing it consciously or unconsciously. There's an author, Annie Dillard. Have you ever heard of her? She wrote Pilgrim at Tinker Creek and a couple other books. And she has this quote about like schedules. And she was like, what you do with this hour and that hour is in fact what you are doing. How you spend your time is the culmination of your life. And so I was like, as I was like reading that quote, I was like, wow, like that is so true. Like, it's like, we think to ourselves, like, I've got my schedule in place, so eventually X, Y, Z, but it's like what you're doing, what you've scheduled, what you've decided in that day, that is the writing for that day. That's your page. Like if every day is a page of your book, like what you do today is what you wrote on the page of today, right? So it's like, it's an ongoing process, self-authorship, and it's a process. So it's not a process we have to engage in a sense. It's a process happening to us, but we can cooperate with that process and author consciously, or we can tune out of that process and have a book written anyway, like for us, you know what I mean? Where we don't control the ending and we don't control the outcome and we don't get to decide who the characters are.
Yeah. Literally every single moment, every single choice is an opportunity for self-authorship. And like every moment, like in our lives, like we may or may not be consciously choosing how we react, how we choose to behave, how we choose to interact with other people. And so becoming more conscious of the fact that like I have the opportunity to choose, I think is where you like move into becoming a self-authoring person. Is like there are a lot of choices that I make on a day-to-day basis that like don't feel like choices because I'm not consciously thinking about it. It's just like ingrained. It's like I've been making this choice, I've been behaving this way, and so I don't think that it's a choice. But then when I really like am present with myself and think about it, then I can be like, oh, like if I didn't want to do this anymore, if I decided this wasn't aligned with my values or wasn't aligned with the direction that I want to head in, I could do something different if I really wanted to.
Yeah, I love this, what you're describing. It's like very philosophical, this idea that we make a choice over and over and over. And so at some point, even our mind forgets that it's a choice.
Yeah.
Can you give an example of that? Like something in your life where you were like, oh my God, I thought this was my identity, but I'm choosing this.
Yeah, so I'm kind of debating right now my relationship with coffee and how much I drink it. Every time that I like have a cup of coffee, I'm choosing to have a cup of coffee. I guess you could say like like sometimes I might feel like I'm not choosing because it's just like, oh, this is what I do. But I've been thinking like, oh, is this a habit that I want to have? How good is this for me? Is it, and I love coffee and I'm deciding that I do want to continue to have it. But like for a while, it's like, if you do it enough, if you do any one thing enough, then you could be like, oh, that's just like what I do. Who I am. You begin to like affiliate it with your identity and not realize that like if you ever did want something different, you could choose otherwise. So currently debating like how much do I want to have it? Is it aligned with my health goals? So far, I'm not finding any issues with it being aligned with my health goals, so I'm probably not going to stop. But
How hard are you looking?
huh?
How hard are you looking?
I've been thinking about it a lot like the last like couple months. Um, but since I eat so healthy like everywhere else, I'm like whatever. And I'm not really a big dessert person, so I don't have sweets or sugar a ton. So when I have a little bit of creamer in my coffee, I'm like whatever. I can't be a perfectionist about every single thing that I eat, so I'm
Yes,
not
no
going
doubt. No doubt.
to.
Right. When you said you make the choice, like with the coffee, it's like, oh, I just drink it. So like, this is who I am. This is what I do. It
Yeah.
made me think about like self-authorship is not just an individual phenomenon. It's a collective phenomenon too. Like
Yeah.
we're self-authoring as a society in the West, in America, and we're
Right.
self-authoring as a species on the globe, you know. And so
Yeah.
self-authoring is already it's pervasive. And when you say this is just the way I am, this is just what I do, that's
Mhm.
the same as on a collective level saying, well, this is just the way it is. This is just
Yeah.
how it's done,
That's the way
even
it's
though how
been.
it's done is toxic. Yeah, like
Yeah.
an example that keeps coming into my mind, and this is a small minor example, but it's like when you see a kid melting down in a grocery store or a Target or something like that, and the
Yeah.
parents get humiliated and they turn like sports car candy apple red, you know what I mean? And then they go to their kid, shh, you know what
Yeah.
I mean? Or worse, they grab their kid hard and are like, quiet down, that kind of thing. It's like, why are we doing that? You know what I mean? And they're doing that. This is me speculating because I'm not in those heads, but it's like in our culture, it's rude and bothersome to let your kids run around yelling and screaming in the store, right? Like that's what our culture's opinion is. It's not my opinion. It's not necessarily the opinion of all the individual people in Target, but it's culture's opinion, right? It's what we think
Yeah.
culture thinks, even though
Instead
culture
of like
doesn't have a brain.
kids are loud and that's okay.
Say it again.
Instead of like thinking kids are loud and that's okay and we can just like let them be. I mean, I know that like the cultural conditioning is like very strong, and you and I, neither of us have kids, and I think if I had kids I also wouldn't want them screaming in a grocery store. But recognizing that like cultural idea of who we are, how we should be, is then like affecting the way that we behave.
Yeah, and not only is it affecting the way that we behave, it's affecting our awareness of the actual outcomes we want, because it's like it's a small thing, but it's like in the store when you get harsh or operate from that place of embarrassment and shush your kid or pull your kid or do whatever you're doing, like right there, you're not even making a choice that's consciously yours. You're doing what culture told you to. So like, grow up first of all and think for yourself. You know what I mean? Because like, come on, like that's something that's just taught. And then at the same time, it's not just that you're not doing what's actually like a conscious choice of yours, but you're messing with the consciousness of the next generation, who is then going to think, oh, I'm not supposed to be loud. You know what I mean? And like, and then they're going to take to their kids and you have to be quiet. So it's like we're self-authoring, and like, this is not me blaming parents, just to be clear. It's just one example. I
I'm
have
glad
my
you're clarifying it because it does sound like you're blaming parents.
No, I have a niece and I mess up with her all the time. I have my nephew. Like parenting is hard, raising kids is hard, being around young people is hard because they don't do what they're told, because they're human just like us. But that's it. They're just a little human. Like, you don't like being told what to do, neither do I. So why would a 5-year-old? Of course they're not going to like it. You know what I mean? But because culture's rule is parents are in charge, they say what they say it, we do it because I said so, that whole thing. We forget, as soon as we're in the generation where we have kids that we could tell what to do, we forget how much we hated that. And we think, oh, that's just culture, so we do it. But if we really could tune in and remember that didn't work for us. Like, as a kid, every time I was told what to do, even if I did it, it didn't teach me, it didn't learn me, it didn't grow me. But having a person come down to my level mid meltdown in Target and say, hey, it's okay, whatever you're going through is hard, and comfort me. Maybe even if they have to take me out to the car because if I'm being too loud, that's fine. But like, in the moment, like when you're melting down, you're conscious that you need comfort, and you don't care if you're melting down in a Starbucks. You're an adult, you melt down, you expect comfort. Be damned if someone tries to shush you. You're going to get in their face, right? But as a kid, if we melt down in public, No, like that's against the rules. That's bad and wrong. Like, so we're keeping the rules of culture in place. I think the watershed thing that's going to make this transition of human consciousness actually happen is people interrupting these patterns in a parental role. So it's not about blaming parents. It's about saying, let's take responsibility for where we're at and let's do things differently going forward for ourselves and for everyone we're in charge of raising.
So, in terms of self authorship, you're saying it may be easier for people to break free from cultural dynamics that have been conditioned if we have a generation of parents who are like meeting children where they're at and like helping them kind of consider their options. Is that where?
I
Okay.
mean, that's sure. I guess what I'm saying is the more that we embrace self authorship, the less likely we are going to be in a target on autopilot yelling at a kid when what we would rather be doing is loving them. Because the
Okay.
truth is, what you would rather be doing is loving them. So, and you know that, I know that. Like, as soon as I yell at my niece, I instantly regret it. And I think to myself, what did she ever do to me? What an asshole am I? So it's like, I
Okay.
get that's where parents are coming from too. You know what I mean? Like, they're not like arch villains. It's not like parents are Lex Luthor. You know what I mean? You make a mistake, you're not evil. You know
Yeah.
what I mean?
Yeah. Okay. So now what I'm hearing is like if we recognize that we have a choice in any given moment to choose how we want to interact with other people, interact with ourselves, interact with the world, then there's usually going to be better choices available compared to just whatever like the first cultural instinct, reactive, like I just need to handle this kind of like yeah, just your instincts sometimes are not going to be as aligned with like how you would actually want to handle a situation if you had the chance or the ability to think about what are my options. But to be fair, um you know, in any moment where your resources are lower, where you haven't slept, where you raising children just lowers your resources because you're always giving so much of yourself all the time, right? It's harder to bridge into that self authorship, to bridge into like what are my options, how do I want to interact, because it does require resources, like inner resources, to be present with yourself and even ask yourself like how do I want to interact. So I think this is actually like important to ask like what do you do to self author, or how do you make that transition into self authoring rather than being on autopilot when there's high stress or your resources are low?
So, I mean, I think it's like anything else, it takes practice. And so, even though we jumped into like, because the example I had was like a parent shushing their kid in public. And so now we're in this like conversation about parenting, and that's okay. But to be super clear, like, you can't possibly be the type of parent I was describing, this like idealized version of a parent first. Like, self-authoring is like, like if we want to show up as that kind of parent, we must learn to self-author. That's what I'm saying. It's not like you go into Target and you're like, oh, let me help my kid learn how to self-author, but I've never self-authored. You know what I mean? Like, it would never work. It's like you're saying our resources are lower. So it takes practice. Like, we the goal isn't to master self-authorship so that we can become better parents. It's just an example. Like, the goal is to master self-authorship so we can have less suffering on the planet. As we do that and we master self-authorship and we have less suffering on the planet, we can then show up for kids in a different way. And by doing that, by being in the target and modeling for them, hey, I'm gonna not follow my impulse, but I'm gonna pause, I'm gonna make a different choice. We're actually modeling for the next generation how to self-author in that moment. But we can't model it for them until we're practicing it for ourselves. So if like you're a parent and you're listening to this and you have like toddlers or whatever, and you've never heard about the concept of self-authorship before, then give yourself a break. Okay. This is not about condemnation. This is not about like anyone's made mistakes or anyone's bad and wrong. Like, anytime we're talking about healing at all or mental health at all, in my opinion, we are not then talking about blame. Blame and mental health and trauma issues are like oil and water to me. It makes no sense to bring blame into the equation because we are enmeshed in patterns that have been going on for a lot longer than we've even been alive. Like, the
Yeah.
the flaws in me, I could blame my mom and dad for those, but that's short-sighted, even though they caused some of it. They caused some, but they're not to blame because they were trapped in their patterns that some of their parents caused, who are also not to blame, who are trapped in patterns that their parents caused, who are also not to blame. So like at what point, how far back do we go and we say, oh, it's my great, 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 great grandmother had that argument with her roommate. It's their fault. All the generational trauma, it's their fault. Like there's no fault. Like we're past fault. We just need to get into solution mode now.
Yeah, well, and to your point, the reason that blame is unhelpful is because you only have so much attention and energy to handle a situation, and the more energy that you're devoting to blame, the less energy that is getting devoted to finding a solution and figuring out how to get to a better place. It literally just like directly blocks your ability to come to a solution by blaming yourself or other people.
Yeah, exactly. And blame is all the energy of blame is focused on like the problem, more about the problem. Let's understand the problem more and more and more. Who caused it? What caused it? Why did they cause it? But that's not, we don't need so much about the problem in order to solve it. We just need to know what works to help it change, what works to fix it. And we don't even need the information blame could provide us in order to get to that answer.
Yeah. Yep.
Yeah.
Okay.
So there are some key elements to self-authorship. There's a researcher named Keegan. What is his first name? I don't know. Anyway, Keegan is a researcher and he did a bunch of research on self-authorship. And he found out he has a theory, the theory of self-authorship. And what he discovered were there's a couple like key elements. So in terms of the how-to, like for people who want to practice, right? Who want to show up in the world differently and we want to get away from our knee-jerk reactions and be able to follow our alignment more. There's trusting the internal voice, which is like basically having some level of control to think about and respond to events. It's what we were just talking about, detaching from the knee-jerk reaction and then actually following an aligned instinct. You said instincts before, but I want to make a distinction that I think it's like our impulses that come from culture that we don't want to follow, but inborn natural instincts are slightly different to me anyway.
No, I agree. Yeah, you're right.
So learning to hear and trust the internal voice is one way to begin self-authorship because you've got to have self-awareness in order to decide, oh, I'm going to make a different choice than the one I was just making. So I must be aware of the choice in order to, and then there's like having some kind of personal philosophy or framework. So he calls it building an internal foundation, but it's like figuring out what you value. Like we've talked about for the last few weeks, like understanding your values and knowing your values helps you to write the sort of story of your life that you want to write, because otherwise, like, what's it about if you don't know what you value? So discovering your values, discovering how your inner voice talks to you. And then the last one, it says securing internal commitments, which is about like living authentically and integrating like your external and your internal worlds together. So it's like, if you make a commitment, like, I'm going to stop having coffee, for example, right? Like if that was your commitment, and I don't think it should be, I don't care what you do. Like it's all good to your life. But if you were like, I'm going to not have coffee, then the way to actually strengthen your self-authorship is to make a commitment to that goal that you can keep. So if you really wanted to be off coffee, but you had a habit of drinking 3 cups a day, right? Just for example, then cool. But then the internal commitment might be like, I'm going to have 2.5 cups or less a day, right? So it's like making promises to yourself that you definitely can keep, as opposed to making commitments to yourself and then dealing with the energy of shame, guilt, and failure because you made a commitment that was too big for where you're currently at. Yeah. So self-authorship is about like being honest, being self-aware, and then taking the tiniest step that you can take with no problem to move forward.
Yeah, that reminds me of a quote. I don't know who it's by, and I might not be saying it word for word, but I really like it. It's nothing builds confidence like following through on your commitments to yourself. Like following through on whatever it is that you said you would do.
Yeah, exactly. I mean, that's hard. The older I get, the more I find myself like saying less.
Making less promises.
Yeah, less promises. Exactly.
Yeah. Well, yeah, because then you become like attached to like, well, okay, this is kind of bridging in a different direction, but if you make your promises too complicated, then you give yourself an opportunity to feel bad about the fact that you didn't follow through on this super complicated and high commitment promise. So why not just make smaller commitments that are doable so you can feel good about it and then build momentum?
Yes, exactly. Momentum. It's so important.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's beautiful. Like the small daily promises, the holistic psychologist, if any of you are familiar with her, she talks about small daily promises, and they're so powerful. That's what Keegan is talking about when he says securing internal commitments. So you have to
Yep.
make sure that whatever internal commitment that you're making to yourself, it is one that you can nail it, that you can conquer it. Like you really, you know what I mean? Like, because that's the whole point. If it's not that, if you bite off more than you can chew, and you succeed, great. You will definitely build momentum. But if you bite off more than you can chew and you fall flat on your face, you will stop the momentum in its tracks. And it's not because failure in and of itself is bad or wrong. It's because that part of our human nature is that we don't like it. And so the small commitment thing, the small promises thing, is a way to avoid the sting of what culture perceives as failure while building momentum. It doesn't mean you'll never fail. It means like, it's like if you jump off the top step, like that's harder when you land. If you just jump from one step down, like, okay, so you fell and you failed, but like you didn't twist an ankle. It was 4 inches, right? So like that's the idea
Right.
of daily promises.
Yeah. Yeah. Also, building on the daily promises, partially like the value of making it smaller, because some people will have a like, um, I forget what the word is, like a criticism of small daily promises and be like, oh, but it's not enough. Here's why you want to make small daily promises. If you make a promise that is too big and it sounds scary to you, your brain will try to talk you out of doing it at all. If you make a super small promise and it sounds really easy to you and you do that small promise, then your brain might talk you into doing it again.
Ooh, that's good.
Mm-hmm.
Wow, I like that a lot. And I like the way you described it too, because you positioned the brain as a separate part from like your regular consciousness. And that makes sense to me. Like I think there like we all are familiar with having conversations with ourselves, right? Like so I think there's something to that, like noticing. It's a noticing, like, oh, I feel good. Like my brain can direct me. Like I can be in conversation with the different parts of myself, the different needs I have, and like, okay, which ones can I meet actually right now?
Yeah,
You know?
true. Yeah.
Yeah, that's
Um,
beautiful.
so one more thing about self-authorship. I feel like, we talked about it in terms of like just choosing our behavior, trying to be intentional. I think self-authorship is also choosing how you tell stories about yourself. Like
Oh
how
yeah.
like when I think about my identity and things about me, if I were to describe that to somebody else, how do I want that story to be told? Because nobody's been sitting like on your shoulder your entire life watching exactly every single moment. Like, how do I want to interpret or perceive my life? And how do I describe that? Because that also affects it. If I mean, it is like the way that you perceive yourself, and you can write your story or tell your story in a way that like supports the direction of progress that you want to move in. Does that make sense?
It totally does. And I'm glad that you're saying it, and I want to bring up a nuance about it, which is that I think, and you can tell me if I'm wrong about this, but I'm pretty sure Morgan is not talking about embellishing your story.
No.
It's about, because that's then leaving the realm of authenticity
Yeah,
behind.
we're not lying. We're not like just embellishing like you said. We're just being thoughtful about the way that we perceive ourselves basically.
Yeah, and it's I think honestly too, it's less even about what you say to others and more about like what is your actual self-concept. And then that self-concept, if you're in your authenticity, is what you would say to others. And so it's like if your self-concept is one of like woe is me, or I'm a victim, or whatever, and you can actually have been victimized and still not have that victim consciousness. So I want to separate two things out. Like yes, there are real victims on this planet that like we need to address and redress, and there's injustice, and then there's like feeling like a victim when you have plenty of agency, even if you had previously been victimized or not. And so
Yeah.
it's like the feeling, it's the concept part I'm talking about, not actual stuff that happened to people. So if you have that concept, then that concept is how you will express, that's how you will describe yourself. And so part of self-authorship is like rethinking reconnecting with the story of our lives and seeing if there's another version of that story or another way to tell that story that feels equally true but more empowering.
Yeah. Well, and we've talked about, I do resilience coaching. I help people like bounce back from difficult circumstances. And whether somebody is resilient or not often depends on what the story is that they're telling themselves about whatever it is that happened to them. So something bad happens to you, and then you have one of three paths that you can go down. You can kind of break down, this bad thing happens, and then you kind of like downward spiral. You could relatively like recover to baseline, or you could later kind of have some form of post-traumatic growth. And whether you are able to access that post-traumatic growth depends on whether you are perceiving the bad thing that happened to you as an opportunity for growth, as an opportunity to build your skills, as a learning experience. And so sometimes when bad stuff happens, we'll just perceive it as like you mentioned before, woe is me, this is a bad thing. And that's valid. Something bad happened. But are you looking for a way to gain something from it or
Yeah.
not?
Yeah, exactly. And it's not even the initial, it's like what you described, like you have these three paths, right? You could break down, you could stay even, or you could grow. Like, it's also like,
there's usually always some element of breakdown, but then you
exactly. That's what I was just going to say, just so people understood. Like, it's not that we're saying don't allow the breakdown. In fact, quite the opposite. Like, you need to tell your body the truth always. So like, if you feel sad, if you feel the injustice, like tell yourself the truth and feel it. But as you're grieving, there's a point in that initial part of the grieving process where there's a decision, a moment of decision to get curious and learn, or to wallow.
Yeah.
And so it's like, you're from here where the bad event happened, most likely you are going to break down. That's not a choice, generally speaking. Like, we do need to grieve. We must go here, right? Like that, start here. And then from here, it's like, do I wallow, or do I recover to baseline, or do I have an opportunity for growth? But you're going to have the little downswing because some bad shit happened to you, and that's okay.
Right. And finding a way to get yourself to the post-traumatic growth path, that requires self-authorship. That requires consciously choosing, how do I find a way to make this not be 100% negative for me?
Yeah, exactly. To like choose the meaning that we want to give it. That was the other thing in Keegan's research that really struck me, which I wanted to mention. So I'm glad we're talking about it, which is like how we construct a meaning instead of things having an inherent meaning. It's like we construct the meaning. So going back to the kid in Target, right? It's like the meaning of the kid yelling to a parent who overreacts is like, I'm going to be embarrassed, or this is against cultural rules. Like, that's the meaning they give it, right?
So this kid is like disobedient or problematic or
right,
whatever. Yeah.
And that might be the meaning some of the onlookers are giving it too. And then there's other onlookers giving it a different meaning, like, oh, poor kid, they're suffering, right? You know what I mean? And there's yet other onlookers that are like in their Game Boy. Sorry, I dated myself. In their whatever kids play now, and they don't have an opinion about it, and that's their perception. So it's like choosing our meaning is so important, because the people in that Target who choose the meaning of like, oh, poor kid, they're actually calmer. They have less cortisol. They're not in a fight or flight. Their nervous system is still fine. So it's like, it's not like it doesn't have a consequence what you choose to, how you choose to perceive. It does. And if you choose to perceive the world with compassion, sensitivity, and benevolence, you are going to end up healthier.
Yeah. Oh gosh, that's kind of like scary how much of a consequence there is to just how you perceive something. Because well, this is the whole. I have this Instagram account that I love following that is like this Australian like young girl who always plays the character of a Karen. And so she's like angry at everything. And it's like every opportunity to take offense to something, you just like rail people. And she always makes these like faces to like emanate like this woman who's just like upset at everything. But it's like the real person that is paying for that, for your choice to be upset at everything, is yourself.
Mm-hmm.
The person who interprets things as a constant offense, they're experiencing an immense amount of cortisol, an immense amount of stress. and anger that really can break down your body, to be honest.
Yeah, it's so true. And it really can. And like the idea that people sometimes think because culture is so ingrained in us, we think in that moment we can't choose. Oh, you got in my face, I must come back. Like that's culture. Like stand up for yourself, right? But like if you think about it, like we've all had experiences where like there's somebody in a room who does something offensive and like one person is like really really offended and another person doesn't care at all, you know what I mean? And like so that's those kinds of situations, when you're in a situation where you see something like that, that's proof, that's solid proof that the meaning is not in the exchange, but the meaning is in the mind that witnesses the exchange.
Yeah.
Because two people having an exchange and one person's not bothered and another person is mortally offended shows us that it's the perceiver that chooses how they're going to experience the events of their lives.
Mhm. Yeah. Circumstances are separate from the thoughts that you have about the circumstances.
Yeah, which honestly is the crux of self-authorship right there. Oh, some
Yeah.
stuff happened to me. Let me write my meaning in.
Yeah. Yeah. But it happens so fast that you don't realize that there's a separation there. A lot of times. I mean, like when we think about it constantly, then we recognize there's a separation. But like most of the time, every single time that something happens in your life, your brain is writing some sort of interpretation of it.
Mm-hmm.
So do we want to choose our interpretation if there are interpretations that will benefit us or make us feel better, healthier, happier in our day-to-day life? Like, yes, of course we want to choose, but if you don't realize you have a choice, if you don't realize there's an opportunity to self-author, opportunity to rewrite the meaning, then you just miss it.
Yeah, you just miss it. That's why it takes practice. So even though we're talking about self-authorship and we're presenting like what is the idealized way, it's like it also takes practice, and we still don't do it right all the time. Like I barely do. So like I'll be honest, you know what I mean? Like it's very difficult to remember that what you're thinking in the ticker tape of your brain isn't your identity, and you get to change it if you want to. So
Yeah.
it's hard, it's difficult, it's a lifelong pursuit, but it's entirely worth it, because when you get a handle on it, your life starts to be a lot more of what you wanted it to be, because you're writing it
Yeah.
rather than being on a roller coaster that's writing you.
Yeah. I think that's a good place to wrap up.
Right on. Well, thank you, Mo. This was a pleasure. I really had an enjoyable time talking about this today.
Yeah. Yeah. Me too.
So everybody, thank you so much for being here. If you want to find out about Morgan and what she does, you can find her online at selfloveatlas.coach or on Instagram at Morgan Barbrett. And if you want to learn more about me and what I do, you can find me at thebrianhogan.com or on social media at thebrianhogan. Otherwise, we will be here next week for season 4, episode 12, our finale. One more time, going in deep about authenticity on Friday morning at 9 a.m. Eastern time. Until then, be hot, be messy, and be blessed.
Ooh.
Much love. Bye, everybody.